There's one thing you must bow your head to, whether you're an emperor ruling over vast empires or a billionaire controlling the global technology network: time. The fear of death is the most justifiable fear, yet it's also the greatest obsession of those at the top. Today, Past Shadows will take you from the ancient Chinese poisons used to seek immortality to the multi-million-dollar blood transfusion laboratories in Silicon Valley. Why, after thousands of years, are humans still frantically searching for the key to eternal life? There is something deeply unsettling about watching powerful men grow old. Because power creates an illusion, the illusion that control has no limits. But time has destroyed every empire that ever existed. It erased kings, it buried conquerors, and it reduced men once worshipped as gods into dust beneath the earth. Yet even now, humanity continues the same ancient war. More than 2,000 years ago, Qin Shi Huang believed he could defeat mortality itself. He unified China. He built roads across mountains. He commanded armies large enough to darken entire valleys. But behind the imperial throne stood a man terrified of one thing: aging. The tragedy of powerful men is not that they desire more life. It is that they believe their importance makes them exempt from death. And so the emperor searched desperately for immortality. He sent expeditions across violent seas. He trusted alchemists who promised eternity. He consumed mysterious elixirs crafted in secrecy, poisons disguised as salvation. And somewhere deep inside the emperor's mind, a horrifying realization began to grow. What if the greatest empire on earth still could not protect a single human body from time? Today, the scenery has changed. The silk robes became black turtlenecks. The torchlight became glowing laboratory screens. But the fear remained exactly the same. Inside Silicon Valley, modern billionaires spend millions of dollars attempting to slow biological decay. They monitor every heartbeat, every calorie, every sleeping pattern, every microscopic sign of aging, not with magic, not with ancient rituals, but with algorithms, blood analysis, and bioengineering. But perhaps this raises a darker question. What happens when people with unlimited wealth refuse to accept being human? In ancient China, emperors searched for eternal life through alchemy. In modern America, the ultra-rich search for it through technology. The method changed, the fear did not. Because at the highest levels of power, death no longer feels natural. It feels offensive. And perhaps that is why the richest people in every civilization eventually become obsessed with the same impossible dream: to negotiate with time itself. But time has never negotiated with anyone. Welcome to Past Shadows. There is a strange loneliness that comes with absolute power, because once a man stands above every enemy, he finally notices the one enemy he cannot execute: himself. More than 2,000 years ago, Qin Shi Huang ruled over the most powerful kingdom in East. Entire nations collapsed beneath his armies. Walls rose across mountains. Roads stretched through valleys like veins across the earth. For the first time in history, China stood united beneath a single ruler. And yet, the emperor could not sleep peacefully, because power changes the way a man sees death. For ordinary people, death is inevitable. But for emperors, death feels unnatural, almost insulting. How could the ruler of millions be reduced to the same fate as a farmer? How could the man who commanded history itself simply disappear? And so the emperor became obsessed with permanence, not merely surviving, but continuing forever. He surrounded himself with alchemists, mystics, and scholars who promised answers hidden beyond the edge of the known world. Some spoke of sacred mountains hidden within the sea. Others claimed immortality could be consumed like medicine. The emperor listened to all of them. because fear makes even the most powerful men vulnerable to impossible promises. Soon, entire expeditions were launched across violent oceans, searching for mythical lands where death no longer existed. Thousands traveled in the emperor's name. Some never returned. Others returned with stories too fantastic to believe. But perhaps the most tragic part of the story was not the emperor's desperation. It was the silence surrounding him, because no one dared tell the most powerful man in the world the truth, that every dynasty eventually falls, every body weakens, every heartbeat ends. Instead, they sold him hope, elixirs, ancient formulas, whispers of eternal life hidden inside secret rituals, and the emperor consumed them willingly, because at the highest levels of power, people no longer seek truth, they seek control. But time cannot be controlled, and somewhere inside the golden halls of Qin China, behind the armies, behind the ceremonies, behind the illusion of divine authority, stood an aging man, slowly realizing that even emperors remain human. There is a dangerous moment that appears in every civilization, a moment when intelligent people become so afraid they begin believing impossible things. For Qin Shi Huang, that moment arrived inside the chambers of alchemists. The emperor, who had conquered kingdoms, was now trying to conquer nature itself, and history has always punished men who attempt that. The formulas prepared for the emperor were not called poison. They were called hope. Ancient elixirs crafted from rare minerals, sacred compounds, and mysterious rituals whispered through generations of court mystics. Promises carefully wrapped inside ceremony. Promises that aging could be slowed, that weakness could be reversed, that death itself could somehow be delayed. And perhaps that is the most tragic pattern in human history. The more powerful a person becomes, the easier it is to surround them with beautiful lies. Because nobody profits from telling powerful men the truth that every body decays, every mind weakens, every empire eventually watches its rulers grow old. But fear creates markets, even thousands of years ago. So the emperor consumed the elixirs willingly, again and again, believing somewhere inside those mixtures existed salvation. But the human body does not negotiate with fantasy. Many ancient immortality formulas contained toxic substances that slowly damaged the body over time. What was presented as healing often became destruction. And somewhere during those final years, the emperor's search for eternal life may have accelerated the very thing he feared most, his own mortality. There is deep irony hidden inside this story. The most powerful ruler in ancient China was not destroyed by enemy armies, not assassinated by rivals, not overthrown by rebellion. He was defeated by the universal human terror of disappearing. And perhaps modern civilization is not as different as we imagine, because today, the language has changed, but the psychology remains identical. Ancient emperors trusted alchemists. Modern billionaires trust longevity experts. Ancient rulers consumed mysterious formulas. Modern elites consume endless pills, hormones, experimental therapies, and biological optimization programs. Both civilizations believed the same thing, that wealth could somehow purchase distance from death. But death has always remained undefeated. And perhaps the cruelest truth of all is that time often destroys us through the very things we hoped would save us. History rarely repeats itself perfectly, but fear does. More than 2,000 years after the fall of Qin Shi Huang, humanity once again stands inside laboratories, searching for escape from mortality. Only now, the robes have become designer jackets. The palace chambers have become biotechnology facilities. and the alchemists speak the language of data instead of mysticism. Inside Silicon Valley, aging is no longer treated as destiny. It is treated as a technical problem, a flaw to be repaired, a system to be optimized. And perhaps that is one of the most dangerous ideas modern civilization has ever created. Because once human beings begin viewing the body as software, death starts looking like a bug. Modern billionaires now spend extraordinary amounts of money studying longevity. Entire teams of scientists monitor their blood, organs, hormones, sleep cycles, heart activity, and biological age. Every calorie is measured, every movement tracked, every sign of aging treated like an approaching enemy. Some wake before sunrise to follow strict anti-aging routines, designed down to the minute. Others consume dozens of supplements every single day. And increasingly, many of them speak about aging the same way ancient rulers once spoke about disease, as something humanity should eventually eliminate. But beneath all the futuristic language, the psychology remains ancient, because biohacking is not only about health, it is about fear. The fear of losing intelligence, the fear of losing beauty, the fear of watching the body slowly betray the mind, and perhaps most of all, the fear of becoming irrelevant. For most ordinary people, aging is accepted gradually. But for men who built empires from ambition, aging feels humiliating. How could the mind that transformed industries be trapped inside weakening flesh? How could someone powerful enough to influence millions still be powerless against time? And so the modern search begins, not through sacred mountains or mythical oceans, but through blood analysis, artificial intelligence, gene therapy, cellular regeneration, cryogenic preservation, and endless streams of biological data. Yet despite all the technology surrounding them, many of these men appear strangely similar to ancient emperors. Restless, obsessive, unable to stop calculating how much time remains. Because perhaps civilization has changed less than we think. Ancient rulers searched for immortality through ritual. Modern billionaires search for it through science. But both are ultimately trying to solve the same unbearable truth: that no amount of wealth has ever purchased permanence. And somewhere tonight, inside glowing laboratories filled with machines and algorithms, modern civilization continues humanity's oldest dream: to become powerful enough to say no to death. There is something strangely ancient about the modern obsession with young blood. Despite all our technology, despite artificial intelligence, despite genetic science and billion-dollar laboratories, humanity still returns to symbols older than civilization itself. Blood. For thousands of years, blood represented vitality, strength, inheritance, and life force. Ancient kings believed royal blood carried divine power. Warriors spilled blood to preserve empires. Religions transformed blood into sacred ritual. And now, modern civilization has found a scientific language for the same ancient desire: to absorb youth from another human being. In recent years, some wealthy biohackers began experimenting with plasma transfer therapies. The idea was simple: if young blood contains healthier biological signals, perhaps older bodies could temporarily benefit from exposure to it. And almost immediately, the modern world became fascinated. Because beneath the medical terminology, the symbolism felt disturbingly primal: an aging civilization searching for youth inside the veins of the young. Perhaps that is why these images affect people so deeply. A wealthy older man, connected by tubes to younger blood. Machines quietly circulating life between generations. Sterile white laboratories attempting to recreate what ancient rulers once searched for through mysticism. The ritual changed, the psychology did not. And maybe that is the uncomfortable truth hidden beneath modern longevity culture. The wealthy are not merely trying to live longer. They are trying to escape decline itself. Wrinkles, weakness, slowness, fragility, all the visible reminders that the body eventually loses its negotiation with time. But history suggests something darker. Civilizations become spiritually unstable when they become obsessed with preserving youth forever. Because aging serves a purpose. It humbles ambition. It transfers wisdom between generations. It reminds powerful people that they are temporary. Without mortality, human beings begin imagining themselves as permanent rulers over a world that never truly belonged to them. And perhaps that is why modern biohacking feels strangely unsettling to many people. Not because it seeks health, but because it quietly transforms aging into failure, a condition to hide, a weakness to eliminate, a biological humiliation for those wealthy enough to resist it. Yet no machine has solved the oldest truth of all. Youth has always been temporary. Every generation eventually watches its strength fade. Every civilization eventually confronts decay, and no amount of money has ever prevented the human body from obeying nature. Still, inside silent laboratories across the modern world, the search continues. The ancient dream reborn once again through plastic tubes, biometric screens, and refrigerated blood. Humanity's oldest fear: wearing modern clothes. Perhaps the greatest difference between ordinary people and the powerful is not wealth. It is their relationship with endings. Most human beings slowly learn to accept limitation. They accept aging, accept exhaustion, accept that life moves in only one direction. But people who spend decades controlling industries, governments, markets, or empires often develop a very different psychology. Because power changes the brain, it creates the dangerous illusion that every obstacle can eventually be solved, every weakness optimized, every problem negotiated, and after years of shaping the world according to their will, death begins to feel almost irrational. Why should the man capable of transforming civilization be forced to obey the same biological rules as everyone else? Why should someone wealthy enough to influence millions still lose control over his own cells? This is where the obsession begins, not merely with living longer, but with refusing surrender itself. Perhaps that is why the wealthiest people throughout history have often feared death more intensely than ordinary citizens, because for the powerless, death may represent rest. But for rulers, death represents confiscation, the loss of status, the loss of influence, the loss of identity. Everything they spent a lifetime building suddenly separated from them forever. And the human mind struggles to tolerate that thought, especially minds trained to dominate. Qin Shi Huang could command armies across mountains. Modern billionaires can reshape financial markets with a single decision. Yet neither can stop their hands from aging. Neither can negotiate with time. And perhaps that helplessness creates a unique psychological terror, visible only among the extremely powerful. The terror of becoming irrelevant. Aging quietly threatens everything modern civilization worships: speed, productivity, beauty, innovation, control. The older the body becomes, the more it reminds powerful people of something they desperately try to avoid: dependence, fragility, decline. That is why many modern elites speak about aging almost like engineers, discussing a defective machine, something to repair, something to redesign, something eventually removable through technology. But human beings are not machines, and civilizations become spiritually dangerous when they begin treating mortality as a technical inconvenience rather than a universal truth. Because mortality creates humility. Without it, ambition has no natural boundary. Perhaps that is the real fear hidden beneath modern biohacking culture. Not simply the fear of death, but the fear of losing superiority. The fear that eventually, wealth, intelligence, fame, and power will all reach the same conclusion: silence. And maybe that is why powerful civilizations repeatedly create myths of immortality, because human beings can tolerate suffering more easily than irrelevance. When the human body begins to fail, civilizations search for new containers. Ancient rulers built pyramids, burial chambers, golden tombs designed to preserve identity beyond death. Modern civilization has simply updated the architecture. Now the tomb is digital, and the dream remains exactly the same: to continue existing after the body disappears. For thousands of years, immortality belonged to mythology. But today, some technologists genuinely believe consciousness may eventually be transferred into machines. Memories preserved as data. Personalities reconstructed through artificial intelligence. Human thought uploaded into systems capable of surviving biological death. And perhaps that is one of the strangest moments in human history, because modern civilization no longer asks whether humans should live forever, only whether technology can achieve it first. Some believe future AI systems may one day simulate a person so perfectly that death itself becomes psychologically meaningless. A digital version, continuing conversations long after the original human body is gone. Others invest in preserving their voices, writings, memories, and neural activity in hopes that future technologies may somehow rebuild identity itself. But beneath all the futuristic language, the emotional desire remains ancient: the refusal to vanish. Qin Shi Huang built enormous burial complexes to project permanence beyond death. Modern billionaires build digital legacies designed to outlive flesh. Different civilizations, same fear. Perhaps that is why these visions feel both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Because somewhere beneath the optimism of technological progress hides a darker question. If a machine copies your memories, is it truly you, or merely an echo pretending to be alive? Human beings have always struggled to accept disappearance. Religions promised afterlives, empires built monuments, families preserved bloodlines. Now technology promises data continuity. But continuity is not necessarily consciousness. And maybe that is the uncomfortable truth modern civilization quietly avoids. Information can survive death, but survival may not be the same as existence. Still, the search continues. Neural mapping, brain scanning, artificial consciousness research, voice replication systems capable of imitating the dead with frightening precision. An entire industry slowly emerging around humanity's oldest emotional wound: the fear that one day our thoughts will simply stop. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is that the more technologically advanced civilization becomes, the more terrified it appears of silence. Because somewhere deep beneath all the algorithms and machines, humanity is still asking the same ancient question whispered by kings, emperors, and dying men throughout history: can anything about us truly remain forever? Every civilization eventually reaches the same temptation. The temptation to believe it has become powerful enough to escape nature itself. And every civilization eventually discovers the same painful truth: nature always collects its debt. Qin Shi Huang attempted to force eternity upon the human body. Modern civilization attempts to force permanence through biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and engineered longevity. But perhaps the deeper question is not whether these efforts will succeed. Perhaps the deeper question is what humanity becomes while trying. Because there is a hidden psychological cost to fearing death too intensely. A civilization obsessed with avoiding mortality slowly loses its relationship with meaning. When human beings believe they should never decline, they begin fearing every wrinkle, every weakness, every reminder that life moves in seasons, and eventually, aging itself becomes treated like failure. But nature was never designed to preserve anything forever. Forests decay, empires collapse, stars burn out, even mountains slowly disappear beneath time. Mortality is not an accident inside existence. It is part of the structure itself. And perhaps that is why civilizations become spiritually unstable when they attempt to eliminate it completely. Because without endings, human ambition becomes limitless. A ruler who believes he should never die becomes dangerous. A billionaire who believes aging is unacceptable may eventually begin viewing ordinary human limitation as obsolete. History has already shown what happens when powerful people stop accepting natural boundaries. They begin treating humanity like material, something to redesign, optimize, control, even sacrifice. Perhaps that is why the ancient search for immortality often carried darkness beside it. Fear transforms wisdom into obsession, and obsession eventually demands victims. Ancient emperors exhausted entire kingdoms, pursuing eternal life. Modern industries now generate billions of dollars from humanity's fear of aging. Anxiety has become economy. Wrinkles became market opportunity. Mortality became business. And maybe this is the strangest irony of all. The harder civilization tries to escape death, the more emotionally imprisoned it becomes by fear of it, because the obsession never ends. Longer life creates desire for even more life. Youth preservation creates terror of visible aging. Optimization creates paranoia about decline. The body becomes a project under permanent surveillance. And perhaps somewhere inside this endless pursuit, human beings quietly lose the ability to simply exist peacefully, to grow old naturally, to disappear with dignity. Nature never promised immortality, only continuation. One generation replacing another, one season yielding to the next. And maybe wisdom begins the moment civilization remembers that permanence was never the purpose of life. Every powerful technology eventually creates inequality. Fire created power. Industry created empires. Information created digital elites. And perhaps one day, longevity itself may become the most valuable privilege on Earth. For most of human history, rich and poor still shared one final equality: death. Kings died, workers died, empires collapsed beside villages. Time eventually humbled everyone. But modern civilization may be approaching a moment unlike anything humanity has experienced before. A world where the wealthy do not simply live better, but live significantly longer. And if that happens, civilization itself may begin to fracture in ways far more disturbing than economic inequality alone. Because money can already purchase safer environments, advanced healthcare, superior nutrition, and reduced physical stress. The rich often age differently from the poor. But what happens when biotechnology expands that gap dramatically? What happens when only certain people can afford advanced gene therapies, experimental treatments, cellular regeneration, or life-extending technologies? Perhaps future inequality will no longer be measured only through wealth, but through biological time itself. One class aging slowly, another aging normally. One class extending vitality decade after decade, another buried beneath ordinary mortality. And maybe that is the most unsettling possibility hidden beneath modern longevity culture. Not immortality, but separation. A civilization where the wealthy begin experiencing life almost differently from the rest of humanity. History already warns us what happens when elites become too distant from ordinary people. Empires destabilize, trust collapses, societies fracture psychologically long before they collapse politically, because human beings can tolerate inequality more easily than they can tolerate permanent hierarchy, especially biological hierarchy. Imagine a future where corporate leaders remain powerful for generations, because aging slows dramatically for those wealthy, enough to afford treatment. Imagine political dynasties, extended not by ideology, but by enhanced longevity. Imagine young generations competing economically against elites who simply never leave positions of influence. Perhaps that future sounds extreme, but many civilizations throughout history once believed impossible things could never happen. Until they did. And maybe the deepest fear hidden inside this future is not technological. It is spiritual. Because mortality creates turnover. New generations emerge because older generations eventually disappear. Without that cycle, civilization risks becoming frozen beneath the ambitions of those already in power. Qin Shi Huang wanted eternity for himself alone. Modern civilization may unintentionally create systems where extended longevity belongs primarily to the wealthy. Different methods, same imbalance, and perhaps that is the final irony of humanity's war against death. The closer civilization moves toward extending life, the more it risks creating a world that feels less human for everyone else. In the end, every civilization arrives at the same silence. The silence that follows power. The silence that follows ambition. The silence that follows a human life finally reaching its edge. Qin Shi Huang once believed his empire could outlast mortality itself. He commanded mountains to be carved, roads to stretch endlessly across the land, entire armies to follow him into death beneath the earth. And yet today, he survives mostly as memory, a name carried through history, a man who feared disappearing just as deeply as anyone else. Modern billionaires may possess technologies ancient emperors could never imagine: artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, neural mapping, biological optimization. But beneath all the machinery, the human condition remains unchanged. Cells still weaken, bodies still age, time still moves in one direction. Perhaps that is why humanity's search for immortality feels both tragic and strangely beautiful. Because hidden beneath the obsession is love. Love for existence, love for consciousness, love for one more sunrise, one more conversation, one more year beside the people who matter to us. Maybe the desire to live forever is not truly about arrogance. Maybe it is simply grief in advance. The grief of knowing everything we love must eventually end. But nature has always understood something civilizations repeatedly forget. Life gains meaning precisely because it cannot be held permanently. A flower matters because it fades. A season matters because it passes. A human life matters because it ends. Without endings, moments lose weight. Without mortality, time loses value. And perhaps wisdom begins the moment human beings stop asking how to escape death and start asking how to live meaningfully before it arrives. Qin Shi Huang built monuments hoping permanence could defeat time. Modern civilization builds digital systems attempting to preserve identity beyond biology. But maybe true immortality was never physical. Perhaps immortality exists only in consequence, in kindness passed forward, in civilizations shaped by our choices, in memories carried by those who remain after us. Because eventually, every emperor leaves the throne, every billionaire leaves the boardroom, every human hand releases its grip on the world. And when that final moment arrives, technology may prolong life, but it cannot answer the oldest question of all. What kind of person were we while we were here? Perhaps that is the only form of eternity humanity was ever meant to possess. A life remembered not for how long it lasted, but for what it gave to others before disappearing. And somewhere tonight, while cities glow beneath artificial light and ancient tombs rest silently beneath the earth, time continues forward without permission from kings, billionaires, or civilizations, as it always has, as it always will. Welcome to Past Shadows.